17. Tlamakti. The entryway to the vault of Xolotlan was massive, a great domed chamber centered by a downward spiraling stairway that traditionally stood under guard by armed, clergy-trained Ektal. Its expanse was otherwise empty, drawing the eyes of the generally royal visitor to the intricate glyphic text choking the walls and ceiling, the entire text of the Bastion of Will having been laid down in the silver-inlaid obsidian. Firelight, playing over the glassy interior, simmered from low braziers set amongst the guards. It all served as one final reminder to the intrepid seeker of the dead that every step into the darkness below carried the weight of eternity in it. It was, in Ichtak's mind, the most imposing place in the palace. On the morning of the Tlamakti, things were markedly different. The quiet remained, but the guards were gone. In their place, the provincial royalty of all the empire stood vigil over the stairs, both the old and the new world lines having flocked to play their role in this once-in-a-lifetime upheaval, playing out in the capital. King Tlaktal of New Tepeklan and his entourage of New World royalty had flown in upon a newly finished triplane, custom-built for intercontinental flights, taking the opportunity to flaunt the wealth of the colonial provinces. Others, like the representatives of the Kushkotishko dynasty, had ridden in by train car, delegating the command of mountaineers and legionnaires along the Idleland's border until the time-honored Tlamakti could be settled. There was to be no whispered debate or jovial catching up, with each and every soul in the gathering having eyes only for the far doors, and the prince they knew would soon push through them. When at last he did, the crowd shifted, clearing the way for his descent into the vault. He was clad only in a wrap of silk about his waist, as tradition demanded, with no markings or crests to adorn him, forgiveness unsheathed and readied at his side. His witness, Ektal Legate Tlaloc, followed closely in his wake. The old advisor and the upstart warrior, the elder permitted to carry nothing save his uniform into the shadows beneath them. Ichtak stopped at the edge of the crowd, scanning the gathered faces, which lowered in deference beneath his gaze. From among them, he waved Prince Thunkoat forward. There had been little doubt among those gathered over who the challenger would choose. "Will you walk with me?" "I would be honored, my lord," Thunkoat assured him. There was no mirth in the words now, as there had been those weeks past on the day of the Flower War. There was only respect. Ichtak bowed, grateful, and the three strode down the stairs. The Tlatoani herself would have done the same not an hour before, Ichtak knew, and the faces among the crowd told him who had sided with who. The twitch of an ear here or the narrowing of an eye there from the more cosmopolitan and industrially minded of their number communicated allegiance more honestly than any words could have in that tense, ancient theater. Ruhualpa's old, collectivist, warlike stances were well known, and his influence upon the pugnacious prince had been made obvious. Ichtak could only hope the admiration of the warriors would outweigh the reservations of the financiers if it was he who walked from the vault that afternoon. The prince's small retinue took up oil lanterns left by the priesthood along the walls, bunching together to navigate the simultaneously claustrophobic and sprawling manse. Both Tlaloc and Thunkoat were in silent awe at the prince's back, seeing the storied vault's interior for the first time. "I never thought I'd get the chance to walk the halls of Sholoshaiti's fathers," Thunkoat murmured as they reached the bottom of the stairs, lantern coming up to cast what light it could in the endless latticework of corridors. "The fathers of Kushkotlan might be legendary, and their halls in the mountains beautiful, but these are without peer." They began their long trek, Ichtak in the lead, the familiar path to Ichtak the First's final resting place second nature to him, after all his years of wandering the tunnels. "Don't be too honored, son of Kushkotlan," Ichtak told him. The conquerors who dragged Kushkotlan into the Tlatoani's dominion are down here with you. They can smell the mountain air on you through the veil, I bet." "Bold jokes," said Thuncoat. "Better our southern brothers than the Ida, though. You don't eat us." The trio's feet kicked up no dust, for the priesthood was meticulous in its care for the vault, but their passing did seem to waft the old scents of preservative agents and long-aged linen wraps into prominence. The shuffling patter of their feet echoed down intersections into the endless night of the distant halls, and each past alcove made them feel farther from the world above their heads. Somehow, company made the place less comfortable to Ichtak, as if he had brought uninvited company beneath the noses of stern parents sniffing for trouble. The meditative calm the vault usually brought him swept away by his two companions. This was partially made up for by Thuncoat's talking, though, for it helped to distract him from the looming passage through fate's treacherous maw that yawned wide for him up ahead, ready to save or slay him as Harakwe saw fit. "I've heard my sister thanked you after the battle for the valley, but I want to thank you myself," Thuncoat told him. "You and your men threw wide the passes for us. Let us push the enemy back over the border with our own hands. Even the High Marshal, may his sword be keen in the caverns below, was not afraid to lay down his life for us. It was not his plan, yet he never hesitated. Not once." "Tepeklan has a long history of brave souls," said Ichtak. "They're all around us. I can only hope we live up to their example." "I won't have that," Thuncoat chided. "Your Ebon Ida's ugly head the destroyers dragged back as a trophy for the ages. Ichtak the First would shed a tear of joy at the sight of that ragged beauty. That was a stain on the world only Cromak could love." "It was ugly as sin," Ichtak agreed. "I'm hesitant to keep it preserved as a trophy. It'll ruin any room I keep it in, I think." "Maybe it really was you who was robbed in that contest during the Flower War," Thuncoat said. "I don't know if I could have killed it. Woe to whatever fool the Tlatoani picked to fight you down here, to have to follow that thing up." "My ears deceive me, surely," Ichtak protested. "Is that fear from Thuncoat Kushkotishko?" "I'll fight you in place of the priest if you like," Thuncoat laughed. "Maybe if I kill both of you, Harakwe gives me the crown. A Tlatoani from Kushkotlan sounds divine." The conversation died down the closer they drew to the looming presence of the great conqueror's monument. More than an hour spent treading in silent focus, the spectral hand of the liberator seeming to reach tenderly out to stifle the banter. Ichtak was left to entrance himself within an endless forward gaze through the dark towards his unseen goal, his mind playing out every fight he'd ever experienced. Every sword's fall and swing counted to the best of his memory. Each would be at his disposal today, and worried as he was about unforeseen trouble, he had vowed upon embarking along this course that if he were fated to die here, he would fall like a terrifying wind of shrieking steel. When at last the trio emerged from the tunnels into the shadow of the looming jade replica of mighty Shahwidzul, from which the Empire's founder ruled the dead, they joined Ichtak in his practiced obeisances. Only the Tepekishko dynasty and Ektal guards anointed with their divine blood were permitted this sight, so in deference to tradition, both Thuncoat and Tlaloc tasted the blood of a small cut to Ichtak's thumb. Symbolically imbued with the grace of Harakwe, they continued on, rounding the structure, coming to face the stairway down into blackness which sank beneath its rear face. It was alien to see the revered monument unguarded. Ichtak's mother and the retinue of anointed, silence-sworn Ektal would already be in the depths, awaiting his arrival. The challenger halted, saluting Prince Thuncoat, meeting his eyes, suddenly grasping for a goodbye important enough to do the Mountain Kingdom's stalwart prince justice. "Thank you for your company, and for your contest," said Ichtak. "You might be the greatest fighter in Shuloshaidi, and a great slayer of Ida besides. You deserve every minute of your hour alone with the Founder." "I am honored to have the chance," Thuncoat told him, returning the salute before bowing low. "I await your return, my lord." Thuncoat grinned. Whatever doubts Ichtak might have, they were not shared by the Prince of Kushkotlan. They parted, Tlaloc following Ichtak while Thuncoat rounded the monument once more to sit in the shadow of the Liberator. "Leave the lanterns," Ichtak advised. "The candles will lead from here." Tlaloc did as advised, but both were slowed with the lights gone. As the carven halls gave way to the natural tunnels that honeycombed the land far beneath the highland desert above, they moved largely blind, with distant groupings of candles along each tunnel guiding their steps. The smoothed floors made the task less arduous, and the natural predisposition of Sholoshaitians to the dark aided them in the task, but the unfamiliar territory was foreboding. Often, blackened slopes into intersecting tunnel systems yawned out of the dark to meet them, making them stumble as they made certain their heading was right. The very heart of the Underdeep, the rocky womb of wild and deadly caverns from whence the Sholoshaitians had been born in days before time, beneath which Harakwe was said to sit upon his throne of carven bone, was not far below them. This was its highest and most tamed reach, the sole place the living were permitted to walk. The mines and subterranean foundries that the ancient Sholoshaitians had worked were now over their heads, just as the vaults of Sholotlan and the palace were. Now they were in the priesthood's territory, a place where only the most respected ascetics were allowed to wander and meditate. Though Ichtak knew he should savor this chance in the knowledge that it was the one time he would see the caverns before walking his final walk after his mortal frame was mummified, he found his mind racing in circles, still playing out the fight he knew was to come. Tlaloc was close behind, his hand upon the prince's shoulder, making certain they never separated. For an hour more they wound, downwards and downwards, before at last a persistent rumbling found their ears along the halls, eating away the silent eternity which loomed all around them. "You hear that?" "Yes," said Ichtak. "The falls are near." They soon exited the restrictive, uneven tunnels into a mighty cavern, its ceiling split at the roof by a strong spout of water, said to emit from the waterlogged channels beneath the cenote around which Tepeclan had been established. It thundered down through the gulf of misty, warm, earthen air into a modest subterranean cenote at the chamber's center. All this was lit by a luminescent golden-brown lichen which choked the rough stone of the walls, combining with the haze of the water in the air to cast the space in an otherworldly, yellowish glow. In the still waters beneath the foam of impact, young Luska, the gigantic predatory cave squid which patrolled the deepest reaches of the nation's interconnected cenotes, swirled and flitted in their thousands. Across the pool, standing before a craggy exit on the other side of the cavern, was a Coat, his own blade in hand, clad to match his opponent. Ichtak turned to Tlaloc, saluting him in turn. "You've been a steadfast ally through all this," Ichtak told him. "I'll remember that, whether it's on the mortal coil or the next." Tlaloc saluted, the brisk and long-practiced salute of a lifetime soldier, before stepping back into the entrance. He was to watch from afar, just as Thuncoat was to mind Ichtak the first during their absence. The final steps would be Ichtak's, and they would be taken alone. Ichtak rounded the frothing pool, the cool mist upon his skin a relief after the warm, cramped tunnels, his eye never leaving a Coat. There were perhaps 40 yards between the two once they were face to face, and the prince ate through them slowly with measured paces, Makwahwit hanging ready from his hand, letting the roar of the waterfall die away and cutting out all but the face of the foe before him. "This is a more evocative arena than the ones we used to practice in," Akoat called to him, having to throw his voice to be heard over the echoing crash of the fall. The voice was nervous, uncertain, the speaker having grown no more certain since last Ichtak had seen him kneeling next to the Tlatoani's dais. Perhaps it was meant to remind Ichtak of days past, to make him smile on the countless hours the two had spent talking and clashing, growing and playing, whether as children in the palace or as youths in the Kalmakak. Remember when you joked that it would be nice to have talkative company, minder of the dead? Akoat did not answer. The priest knew in that moment that this was to be a mortal struggle, that there would be no mercy for the Tlatoani's chosen challenger. You'll have plenty of conversation once you're walking the caves to Harakway, Snake. Ichtak took the initiative, as was his custom. He used the weight of his charge to cleave in at Akoat's side two-handed, forcing the priest to either parry with all his strength or fall back, lest he be slain in the fight's opening seconds. Skilled as ever, Akoat slid back out of range, his own Makwahwit coming up to answer the prince's, darting forward in a slash at the prince's left shoulder. Batted aside, the exchange left them close, trading hits at a rapid pace, the clatter of metal competing with the rumbling white noise of the pool. Akoat slashed high, driving Ichtak down into a duck beneath the blade, and caught the prince with a well-timed kick while his blade was out wide. Ichtak absorbed the blow, grunting, catching Akoat's foot with one hand and sending the priest stumbling back away from him, desperate to catch his balance. The prince was glued to him all the while, harassing him with forgiveness until Akoat had gained his footing again, desperate to do more than flee the heavy blows of the glinting weapon. Akoat had never pulled punches during the long years Ichtak had spent sparring with him, but this was somehow different. The prince could not say the strikes carried more weight or were given with more force, but there was an intent behind them which had never been there before. Each whooshing swoop of the priest's toothed blade past him made his heart leap, just as he was sure forgiveness stopped Akoat's pulse in its tracks, when it danced past his throat or swung an inch or so short of his stomach. Duels had ever been a kind of pleasant, mind-numbing balm for him, a place to forget the troubles of the day, but they had never been combat. True combat was not pleasant distraction so much as it was necessary blindness. One could not think toward tomorrow or yesterday, even if they tried, for to do so would result in some misstep or blunder that brought you within range of a killing blow. This was combat, and for the first time since seeing Seti's handwriting in the hospital cot at Kushkotlan, Ichtak was not concerned with tomorrow. He was only concerned with survival. Sparks flew as the diamond-edged teeth of forgiveness caught Akoat's steel, several light strikes being repulsed with ease, feeling out the strength of his opponent. Ichtak let Akoat push him, moving back out of range of his strikes, leaving openings for the priest to pursue before butting him aside or dancing out of his reach. He could see the frustration behind Akoat's frightened eyes, but that did not guarantee him anything. Akoat was here until the end, and Ichtak knew he would give each swing his all, fighting like a cornered animal. The prince lunged forward past his opponent in the wake of one of Akoat's swings, making the priest's eyes go wide. Ichtak was, for a scant second, out of his view. The fight was growing long, and he believed the brash Ichtak to be moving in for the kill. Akoat reversed his momentum, swinging with blade outstretched in a deadly sweep, meaning to catch Ichtak unaware, believing the prince was closing and meant to strike him in the back. Ichtak, anticipating the desperate move, caught the swing between the teeth of forgiveness, putting his full weight onto the blade, forcing Akoat's Makwahwit down low and holding it there. So stunned was Akoat, and so frantic was he in trying to regain control of his blade, that he was wholly unprepared for the shin he caught in the ribs a moment later. With his arms outstretched, both on the hilt of his sword, the kick was devastating. It rattled even Ichtak, who knew he would limp for days after the impact. Gasping for air, Akoat wheeled to the stone, losing his grip on the makwahwit, struggling to piece together what had just happened. Ichtak kicked the hilt of Akoat's blade up and into his free hand and moved in to stand over the rasping Akoat. Ribs had been shattered, that much he knew, and there was no way to tell in that moment whether he had punctured a lung. Ichtak made to finish him, forgiveness climbing up high, ready to deal death, to claim the crown. In the moment, though, he could not make himself bring home the strike. Try as he might to place the sputtering, hissing Ida warlord's visage over the face of his injured foe, or to remember Setiawan, he could only see the silver-haired, mischievous features of Akoat, racked with breathless pain and clawing at the rock below him for purchase his fingers could not find. This was the face of the pup who had slipped stinking cenote fish into the sweet stew of the palace kitchens with him, the co-conspirator who had dreamed up how to sneak from the palace undetected inside trash bins, to explore the Tepeklan markets free of minders and Ektal guardians. The priest's eyes, seeming all pupils now, darted up to him, but Akoat had no words for his would-be executioner, only shuddering, labored breathing. This was Ichtak's choice to make, he told himself, the thoughtless necessity of battle fading away. He had agency here. Ichtak lowered forgiveness, half relieved and half ashamed at his inability to wreak the vengeance he had wanted to wreak just a day before. He knelt down as Akoat began to recover his breath, coming face to face with his old friend. "I will never forget what you did," said Ichtak. "You will never forget that I could have sprayed you across the cavern floor like a burst melon, had I wanted to." The words were in order. Akoat nodded, but Ichtak pressed on before he could manage to speak. "Where is Setiawan?" Akoat swallowed, hesitating. As he saw fiery color darken Ichtak's face again, he made himself gasp. "The Inquisition have him, in the palace dungeons." "Alive?" "Yes," said Akoat, "as far as I know." "Go there," Ichtak ordered. "Tlaloc will help you reach the vault, if you can't walk. Make sure he suffers no more. Stay with him until I have relieved you." Akoat, raising to a strained sitting position, brought a tender hand to his ribs. "I'm to wait until you've seen your mother," Akoat protested. "Only after you're the Tlatoanian name can you grant me clemency." Ichtak lowered himself down into a crouch, his nose almost touching Akoat's, his breath hot with the exertion of the duel. "I am the Tlatoani. What I say was spoken by Harakwe himself upon the fields of fire and war, and so it shall be done." He dragged Akoat up onto his feet, the priest staggering under his own weight. "Move." Akoat bowed his head before staggering away around the pools towards Tlaloc. Ichtak waved to the observing officer, who waved back in acknowledgement. Then he turned for the black opening leading deeper into the caves, blades in hand, and pushed onward into the shadow of the downward tunnel.